Hello, everybody. This is Paul with Torah Ministries. We continue to read the scriptures every day, and we are doing the introduction for Second Peter. This is the introduction for Second Peter. If you missed First Peter, please check that out. And as we go here, reading these scriptures, we're going to look at this introduction. But let's open up with the Shema first, found in Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kivo, Mahuto, Leolam Va'ed. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. And you should love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And have these words which I command you this day be upon your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. And speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you retire and when you rise. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and let them be frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. All righty, so we are up to 2 Peter, and the purpose of 2 Peter is to warn believers about false teachers and to exhort them to grow in their faith and in knowledge of Yeshua, the wonderful Messiah. And Peter wrote this book, and the audience was the original church at large, the church all over, everywhere. It was written approximately AD 67, 3 years after 1 Peter was written, possibly from Rome. Now, after 1 Peter is when the persecution started, and here's where we're at. And the setting was Peter knew that his time on earth was limited. So he wrote about what was on his heart, warning believers of what would happen when he was gone, especially about the presence of false teachers. He reminded his readers of the unchanging truth of the gospel. And that's important because today there are many false teachers out there. The majority of Christian teachers are false teachers. And we look at this, it says in this New Living Testament study guide about 2 Peter, warnings have many forms of lights, signs, sights, sounds, smells, and feelings, and written words, with a varied focus on the purpose is the same: to advise, alertness, and give notice to an imminent danger. Response to these warnings will also vary, from disregard and neglect to enslave or corrective selection. How a person reacts to a warning is usually determined by the situation and the sources. One reacts differently to an impending storm than to an onrushing automobile, and the counsel of a trusted friend is heeded more than the advice of a stranger or fearful images of a child. 2 Peter is a letter of warning from an authority none other than the courageous, experienced, and faithful apostle. And it is the last communication from his great warrior, from this great warrior of Yeshua. Soon threatened he would die, martyred for his faith. Previously, Peter had written to comfort and encourage believers in the midst of suffering and persecution and external onslaught. But 3 years later, in this letter containing his last words, he wrote to warn them of an internal attack, complacency, and heresy. He spoke of holding fast to the non-negotiable facts of the faith, of growing and maturing in the faith, and of rejecting all who would distort the truth. To follow this advice would ensure Yeshua-honoring individuals and Yeshua-centered churches. After a brief greeting, Peter gives an antidote for stagnancy and short-sightings in the Christian life. Then he explains that his days are numbered and that the believer should listen to his messages and the words of Scripture. Next, Peter gives a blunt warning about false teachers. They would become prevalent in the last days. They will do or say anything for money. They will despise the things of Yahweh. They will do whatever they feel like doing. They will be proud and boastful. They will be judged and punished by Yahweh. Peter concludes his brief letter by explaining why he has written it and to remind them that the words of the prophets and apostles that predicted the coming of the false teachers, to give the reasons for the delay in Yeshua's return, and to encourage them to be aware of heresies and to grow in their faith. Addressed to those who share in the same precious faith. 2 Peter could have been written to us. Our world is filled with false prophets and teachers who claim to have the truth and who cannot, and who clamor for attention in the audience. Listen carefully to Peter's message and heed his warning. Determined to grow in knowledge, in your knowledge of Yeshua, and to reject those who preach anything inconsistent with Yahweh's word. The blueprint of this, the three parts of 2 Peter is: number one, guidance for growing Christians or believers who are growing. And then in chapter 2, we look at the danger of the danger to growing a Christian or in your faith. And then chapter 3, the hope for the growing Christian. We see the three themes of this book being diligence, false teachers, and Yeshua's return. If our faith is real, it will be evident in our behavior. If people are diligent in Christian growth, they won't backslide or be deceived by false teachers. And I use that word Christian lightly because the Christian church today is a man-made religion. It's not biblical. Peter warns the church to beware of false teachers. These teachers were proud of their possession, promoted sexual sin, and advised against keeping the 10 Commandments. Peter countered them by pointing to the Spirit-inspired Scripture as our authority. And one day Yeshua would create a new heaven and earth where we will live forever. As believers, our hope is in this promise. But with Yeshua's return comes judgment and all who refuse to believe. That is the introduction to 2 Peter. So sit back and enjoy the books of 2 Peter as we'll read them now. And thank you for watching and reading the Bible with me, and shalom, shalom.